Hello class, Dr. J here. We're going to start with the endocrine system, and we'll begin on this ebook by McGraw-Hill on some gross anatomy. So these are some of the major endocrine glands in the human body. All right, let's take a look at some of these. All right, first we have the pineal gland, and it does actually sit in this area of the brain, and we're going to enlarge it. So they show the enlargement. So the pineal gland sits anterior to the cerebellum there, near the corpus callosum. So all of this is a lateral view of the corpus callosum. And the hypothalamus, which this is considered the master endocrine gland of the human body. Okay, it is all of this right here. We'll look at that in more detail later. And it is connected to the pituitary gland, which has two parts to it, the anterior and posterior pituitary. And we'll also look at that in more detail later. Okay, in the throat area, we have the thyroid gland. And in the mediastinum area, we have the thymus. Okay, so far these are the structures, and then later we're going to look at the function. All right, so anatomy and physiology, another way of saying that would be structure and function. So here's the structure. What is its function? What does it do? Okay, next is the adrenal glands, and classically they sit on top of the kidneys. And we have the pancreas. And then in males, the testes, and in females, ovaries. Now, if we take the thyroid gland and look on the posterior aspect, you're going to notice four dots about the size of a grain of rice. Okay, so there's four of them that piggyback on the posterior side of the thyroid, and those are called the parathyroid glands. All right, let's look at what we're going to, on this diagram, I'm going to go over briefly what each of these endocrine structures do. So we'll start with the pineal gland. Okay, before we go on, I want you to, there's a formula or a flow chart that you should know. So we have the hormone. Okay, and all these hormones have names, and we'll be getting into that. And they are released from a gland. Okay, so a gland essentially releases a hormone. And that hormone is going to go to a target cell. And they are very specific. Most of these hormones are very specific, and we'll get into that later as well. And then there's going to be some sort of function that takes place. Okay, here's an easy example. The adrenal glands, one of the things that they are responsible for is the release of cortisol, which can help with stress. Okay, so the adrenal glands release cortisol, and that travels throughout your system to target cells, and it helps us with stress. Now, cortisol does more than that, but just for now as an easy example, helps us with stress. Okay, so the pineal gland releases melatonin, and melatonin helps with sleep. Okay, actually our sleep-wake cycles. And that's called our circadian rhythms. Melatonin responds to light. Okay, so in other words, in the absence of light, so once the sun goes down, you start to get tired because the body's releasing melatonin. So you're supposed to go to sleep. And then when we wake up, the sunlight becomes present. So once the sunlight enters the room, enters into your eyes and starts to activate some brain stuff, which is a pretty fancy phenomenon that helps us wake up in the morning. Okay, so next would be the hypothalamus. So I'm going to do HT for short. All right, so hypothalamus, or HT for short. It is connected to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary is divided into the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, the anterior releases a bunch of hormones that we'll eventually get into, and the posterior also releases some hormones. In fact, the posterior only releases 2 hormones, and that would be ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. Okay, and then the anterior pituitary releases many more. All right, we'll get into those in a little bit. Okay, next is the thyroid gland. And it releases thyroxine. You may read it as there's actually T3 and T4, which are abbreviations of what the thyroid releases. So T3 is triiodothyronine and T4 is thyroxine. Okay, inevitably they go to the body and it is responsible for metabolism. Okay, the rate at which you burn fuel. Okay, next would be the thymus. Okay, the thymus releases thymosin, and thymosin activates. So this positive symbol, the circle around it, means activates. If there was a negative symbol, that means inhibits. So in the endocrine and hormone world, hormones are activated or inhibited. Okay, so thymosin will activate your T cells, and T cells are a part of our immune system. Okay, so it matures and activates our T cells. Okay, next is the adrenal gland. Okay, the adrenal gland actually releases a bunch of hormones. Okay, so right now I'm just going to say many hormones. Later we'll get into more specifics of what this one does. Okay, the pancreas also releases a bunch of hormones. The classic one is insulin. Okay, so we'll stick with that one for now. So insulin is responsible for sugar glucose regulation. Okay, we also have the parathyroid glands. Okay, and it releases parathyroid hormone, and that is the abbreviation for parathyroid hormone. Okay, and it is responsible for calcium regulation. Okay, get into more detail later, but the quick version is we do need calcium in our body. And if you're not going to consume calcium through diet, then your body will pull calcium out of bone. And that's one of the jobs of parathyroid hormone, is to activate your osteoclasts, and osteoclasts break down bone. And since there's calcium in bone, it'll pull calcium out, raising your blood calcium levels. Okay, so that's one of the functions of parathyroid hormone. And then we have the gonads. Okay, there's the male gonads or testes, and the female gonads or ovaries. Okay, and quick version with testes, there's testosterone involved, and with ovaries, estrogen and progesterone. Okay, we'll get into more detail on those later.